lets you imagine that kind of liability. If you have if you're very wealthy, you've got a lot of equity in the property, it's got a pool, it's got a hot tub, it's got roof decks, what is the actual liability that each of those properties holds? And I think that's the business decision to be made. Do I want to isolate this risk in this one LLC?
Welcome back to another episode of The Richer Geek. I'm happy to have on this episode Jonathan Feniak. How you doing, Jonathan?
I'm doing pretty darn good.
Good. Jonathan is an attorney and partner at Colorado LLC attorney.com. The reason I brought Jonathan on in all the other different types of podcasts that I've had, I've talked about having a team and having an attorney, a good attorney, is part of your team that you will need, whether you invest passively or actively, whether you're a general partner, limited partner, whether you own your own business. A reputable attorney is part of your team. Why are they such a good part? Well, Jonathan, why do we need an attorney on our team if we're investors?
It's a complex world, and you have to assume that the other side has an attorney working for them. And I think you're foolish if you're going in without the same weapons. Don't bring a knife to a gunfight. And if they've got a gun, an attorney, you want to have a gun attorney as well. That's what we offer to our clients, and trying to really extend attorneys into markets where they traditionally have sort of been inaccessible by a lot of people. The big offices downtown where you have to get an appointment weeks in advance, you have to pay a retainer, you're going to be looking at very significant bills. Our model is all about, I need an attorney now. I have something that's pressing. How can I talk to someone who knows about this particular area? And individuals will sign up for half an hour at a time with me, give me a little brief background on the situation. If I need to do some research ahead of time, I will. If it's a topic that I'm dealing with on a daily basis, which is hopefully what people are signing up for appointments with me for, then I'm able to talk to their issues immediately. And then at the end of it, they're done with the engagement. There's no surprise billing. And if there is something that needs to be done, we work on a flat fee basis. So we tell you exactly what it's going to cost. You don't have to worry about, is this 10 hours, 100 hours, how many hours is it going to take? We know how long these things take because this is a really focused area of practice. And so that's what our clients are getting out of this. And at the very least, they're going to be spending a heck of a lot less than the other side, whoever they're negotiating with, on the same transaction, and getting an equal or superior quality of work.
Now, you mentioned that people would call you for certain issues. What are some of the types of things that I would call you up, or the listeners would, what type of expertise?
Yeah, the broad categories are asset protection and privacy. And then you sort of look underneath what that involves. We're not getting involved in any litigation. We're not, dealing with insurance claims or divorce or any of that. It is, if you're concerned about protecting your business interest or your personal interest, your assets, or if you're concerned about your privacy because you're becoming, let's face it, in our society, those who have wealth or those who are in positions of power become targets in many ways. And there's a great story of one of my clients is an executive for a financial services firm, and recently moved to Colorado, but had lived in the Midwest. And he was targeted because he was part of the 1%, during the financial crisis. There were individuals outside his home picketing. He was afraid, his family was afraid, and he never wanted that to happen again. So we were able to allow him and help him acquire property in Colorado without his name appearing in the property records. And so that's that privacy aspect, but it's also, it's asset protection. Your family is an asset. How you can protect your family from those who may may want to come after you. Lawsuits are, it's very easy to sue somebody. We think that shielding those assets from the potential claims of plaintiffs' attorneys is going to put you in a much better negotiating position when it comes time to, settlement. Assuming you did something wrong, right? But sometimes even if you didn't do something wrong, the better strategy is to settle just to make it go away because your time is valuable.
Yeah, well, and also the attorney's costs are, it's cheaper to settle than litigate it and keep it going. I had one of the things that we have to deal with hotels and things like that are the fraudulent ADA lawsuits. They're going around. California, Arizona, and Nevada is just getting hit by, they're called phone book lawsuits. And they just start picking hotels no matter what. And then they sue you. Never went to the hotel, never stepped foot on it. And then they say, okay, well, we'll settle for $5,000. It's cheaper than your attorney costs.
Mm-hmm.
And they get a quick, and they file thousands of lawsuits a year, and it's just, there are those types of people that are out there. Let's talk about, you also do like entity formation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great place for us to start. So it started.
Mm-hmm.
The firm is actually owned by Cloud Peak Law, as the parent company, based in Wyoming. And Cloud Peak Law owns Wyoming LLC attorney. We have Colorado LLC attorney. We also have entity formation services in a number of other states, New Mexico, Florida, Delaware, and most people learn about an LLC and start their business using an LLC or a corporation,
Mm-hmm.
and they sort of have a general idea of what it can do for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they form their LLCs with us. We offer very cheap services. And the things you get, other than just the formation, which, a lot of states you can do on your own, is we set you up with great starting documents, a guide, how to run an LLC,
Mm-hmm.
an operating agreement, consents to open bank accounts, your
Mm-hmm.
articles of organization, all, half a dozen different documents we deliver to people who sign up for an LLC with us. And it will help them deliver on the promise of the limited liability protections an LLC offers. If
Mm-hmm.
you're not respecting your entity, following the guide we give you to understand what it means to respect your entity, that means, not treating it as if it's your alter ego, where you're putting money into and out of it without any record of it. You're not keeping entity records. You're not
Mm-hmm.
keeping separate bank accounts. All of these things. You're probably not going to get any protections from it. If you don't respect it, why would a judge? And so we do, on a monthly basis around the country, in excess of 700 entity formations a month. And that is most people's sort of entree to the law with this business. They need the limited liability protection, and then they have questions about, the particularities. This is my, me and my sister-in-law that are starting this LLC. What do we need to worry about? How should we draft our operating agreement? And so we'll have consultations with them and provide them with guidance. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
they need an NDA. Sometimes they need, a lease agreement or a marketing agreement because they're going to outside third parties, virtual assistant agreements, all these kinds of things. And we can assist with drafting them on a very reasonable prices, all flat fee prices. So we start out with the formations, and then we're there when they need us.
Yeah, that's, and that's, for our listeners out there that are thinking about getting into even as simple things as the fix and flips, or if you're just starting even as a limited partner in an investment, you don't believe, Jonathan, how many times that I've gone to different meetings and people have, 3 or 4 rental homes and it's in their personal name. It's like, well, I got a mortgage on it, and the mortgage wants me to I have to keep it in my name. I mean, what do you tell people? It's like, oh, I'm thinking, it's like, oh my gosh, you don't realize what you've opened up what you're opening yourself up to by keeping things in your own name. What is the importance? Everyone knows it's like, yeah, I need, something about the LLCs. What is that importance to put it
Yeah.
into the LLC?
Yeah, well, there's two kinds of liability that most people experience in their life or that are subject to. And one's going to be personal liability. You're driving around your car, you get in an accident, you've got an insurance policy, and we can't stress it enough. The first a barrier for your personal assets is going to be an insurance policy, right? So having the right amount of insurance for the right risks.
Mm-hmm.
If you get in that auto accident and someone sues you above your policy limits and they get a judgment against you, a limited liability company can protect those business assets from the claims of creditors in certain states. So even in Colorado, we have a pretty good limited liability company laws, but Wyoming really is differentiated from most others in that they have something called charging order protection. It's the sole remedy of a creditor. So if my personal creditor, I get in a car accident and they want to try to go after other assets, my business assets, in most states, a judge will allow them to foreclose on the assets in an LLC. So
Mm-hmm.
foreclose on the assets in my Colorado LLC.
Mm-hmm.
If I have an LLC in Wyoming, they will not allow them to do that. They can sit on the outside of the LLC and wait for distributions to be made. And when the distributions are made, they can sort of siphon them up and take them to pay their judgment. But they can't break into the LLC and sell the assets that are in there or foreclose on them. And so even with a Colorado LLC, many of our clients will form their Wyoming LLC first at the top level as
Mm-hmm.
a parent company, a holding company, and then they'll set up subsidiaries in various states, Colorado or Texas or wherever they have property or potential liability. And what this does is it shields those business assets from that personal liability. The other liability we have is liability which flows from the assets themselves, from the business assets. You own a rental property and someone's, slips and falls. What can they get from that suit? Again, first thing, I can't stress it enough, having appropriate landlord policies on the property. Don't expect that you're going to be covered for these kinds of risks. If a slip and fall, you're renting it out. If you had it as a primary residence and now you've converted it and you don't have a true landlord policy, to make sure you have the right policies there. So what are they going to get above that liability policy? Well, they're going to get the equity in that property. That's going to be subject to the claims of creditors. They'll get a lien against the property in the LLC. But what else will they get? And you talked about you've got four LLCs. If you've got four LLCs, well, then great. Those pockets of liability are going to be isolated from each other. They're not going to be able to go after the assets sort of cross liability to those other LLCs. They're not going to get up into the Wyoming holding company and then to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you imagine a scenario where you've got the four properties in your individual name, somebody slips and falls, sues above the policy limits, they're going to get a lien against that property against the other four or three properties, as well as go over and attach your personal bank account. And so that one event, which could be limited, you could limit your liability just to the assets in that company, are now really limited only by what do you have? how,
Mm-hmm.
how wealthy are you?
Yeah, and that's, please everyone take that to heart. It happens. You can't say, well, I know this person, they won't sue me. He's been in family for. They'll sue you if something comes down to it. I hate to be a pessimist on those types of things, but I've been in multifamily for 20 some years, hotels. People pretend to slip on a crack and trip. Things happen. Another question. So let's say I have, and this can be expensive. It can be a nightmare for the CPAs. I have, 25 properties, and I have limited partners, and each owns 5 properties. Do I have 25 different LLCs, or is it okay to kind of bunch within me as the general partner, and then you have 5 LLCs with the same limited partner? Is it okay to bunch them, or, I mean, do I have that many LLCs?
Yeah, and I was a financial advisor. I have an MBA as well as a law degree, and I think something I bring to to my conversations with clients is there's business decisions to be made.
Mm,
And in certain states like California, they have a California LLC, and it's $800 per year is the franchise tax for a California LLC. In other states, in Colorado or Wyoming, it's pretty reasonable.
mhm,
Your annual fees are low, and so I think there is a decision to be made about what is the best allocation of your funds. If you've got properties with limited equity in them, then I'm okay with bundling them together. I have clients, and you've got four condos in
mhm,
one building, and those four condos, your liability is really pretty low. Your
mhm,
common area liability is going to be one where it's going to fall onto the building. And then within your units, you're going to have pretty good insurance. What could happen? I mean, there's horror stories. There's one horror story. It was in Colorado, and there was a house in Aspen that was it was a charity auction, and a family won the charity auction when they stayed at this house in Aspen, and the entire family died. There was a problem with the carbon monoxide. There was like a heating,
mm,
a driveway heater, and it was improperly installed. And
mm,
so you imagine that kind of liability. If you're very wealthy, you've got a lot of equity in the property. It's got a pool. It's got a hot tub. It's got roof decks. What is the actual liability that each of those properties holds? And I think that's the business decision to be made. Do I want to isolate this risk in this one LLC, or do I feel comfortable because it's four condos, common areas, they're small, they're safe, it's Airbnb. I've got, $1 million of coverage from Airbnb. I've got my own liability policies. You say one LLC would be overkill, especially in a state like California, with $800 per entity. But there is a business decision to be made there, and I talk my clients through it.
okay. Yeah, it makes sense because it's like, my gosh, I don't, my CPA would kill me if I had an LLC for every single one. But I didn't know. But I think it is. When you look at, yeah, four homes that are worth $150,000 each, and they have, you know, they're rentals, right? And the same limited partners. Now, once you get, a lot of our listeners have considerable wealth, and they're doing okay. At what point, and when you're talking about, let's kind of switch over to maybe this is kind of estate planning a little bit, kind of asset protection, kind of folds into that. At what point would you start looking at, okay, you know what, we need to look at maybe an FLP, or a limited partnership within the family, within kind of separating the things out, so that now we're getting into the estate planning, and we want to actually protect the estate, um, and other different things that you could do, not necessarily. And listeners, FLP is was a family limited partnership,
Family
those
limited
types of
partnership.
things for that type of protection.
Yeah, and we do a lot of that as well. So Wyoming is there's been this arms race among different states trying to set up very protective trust statutes, and so you got Delaware,
Mm-hmm.
Nevada, Alaska, Wyoming, South Dakota have all been in this arms race to get people to come there and set up their trusts, and that's sort of the capstone to many of our asset protection strategies. It does achieve estate planning goals, but
Mm-hmm.
Wyoming has a qualified spendthrift trust statute that will really shield those assets from your personal creditors. And that comes into play when you have personal liability, that car accident type of liability, but much greater, that you can't shed because you're the executive of a company and you're on the hook for multi-million-dollar contracts. You're an obstetrician, and if a mother and baby suffer injuries on the birthing table, I don't care how much malpractice insurance you have, you're going to be sued well above it, right? And so what assets can't you really shield? You can't shed that personal liability. If you're an executive in a company, an engineer, an architect, an attorney, a doctor, those tend to be the ones who say, okay, I don't want to lose this. I built up a, two, three, $5 million, and yeah, I could lose it based on a frivolous suit, or if I just screw up. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
people make mistakes, and there's negligence that we all engage in on a daily basis, unfortunately. At that point, a Wyoming Asset Protection Trust can act as I view it as a family office where you're not just talking about your wealth, you're talking about multi-generational wealth now. And it's a great way to remove those assets from the liability you generate by walking around the world or interacting with the world. And it will endure in Wyoming for, there's 1,000 year asset protection trust there. I don't know what's going to be happening in 1,000 years. If you go back 1,000 years, it was the dark ages. Who knows what was going on? But
Right.
let's assume it's not Mad Max or something 1,000 years from now. Those are a part of what we do. Mark Pierce is the Wyoming licensed attorney, and so I work with him to develop these plans with our clients to come up with this comprehensive plan. How do we protect their assets from their personal liabilities and from their business related liabilities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something that we worry about, with as we get into um, tens of millions of dollars worth of real estate holdings. At what point is that LLC's not going to help you? Do I need to start putting things in FLPs and putting things in trusts, and just separating them out? And I think a lot of people don't realize that stuff is even out there. In order to, at what point do you think it's like, okay, I have $1 million worth of assets, I need 5 million? At what point do you have to say, okay, you know what, I need to bump up a little bit as far as the estate planning, instead of just hey, I have a will, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's a continuum there, and I think the continuum. I have people who, they got $500,000, but they're
Mm-hmm.
in very heavily regulated or scrutinized industries, and in Colorado, CBD
Mm-hmm.
is huge, and I think there's
Mm-hmm.
a significant concern there that there could be something happening at the a national level to impose very significant penalties or jail time, or if you're dealing with they're not pharmaceuticals, right? They're not approved by the FDA. What if it turns out there's harm and we wind up with a kind of situation like Philip Morris or one of the cigarette companies did down the road, and there's these unknowns there that cause those individuals to say, look, I'm on a steep asset and a growth path in my life. Why don't I start protecting myself now?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've got all the chips on the table that I want to risk. Start pulling them off, peeling off those assets, getting them into an asset protection trust. But again, that's usually the capstone. There's 6 different ways we think about protecting assets. Typically, our personal liability, unless you fall into one of those sort of professions, you're an executive attorney, so on and so forth, is going to be fairly limited. Even if most terrible car accidents, looking at a couple $1 million, and so you've got good auto liability, and then if you don't have an umbrella policy, you definitely need to investigate it. A $1 to $3 to $5 million umbrella policy is definitely important there. But then there's some risks that an umbrella policy is not going to cover you for, and those professional risks are typically the ones it's not going to cover you for. It will cover you for the car accident. One of the key things here is to not be, I would say, flashy about your wealth, but keep it private. And certain states allow you to form LLCs anonymously, and others don't. We do entity formations in Florida. Florida does not allow for the creation of anonymous LLCs. Wyoming does. You don't have to report the members or the manager to the state of Wyoming. You don't have to do it for Colorado either. You just have to list the organizer. And so we act as the organizer for our
Mm-hmm.
clients. But then using that in a state that doesn't allow for the anonymous formation of LLCs, you use your holding company as the member
Mm-hmm.
in Florida, and then we act as the manager who will immediately resign after formation and assign those
Mm-hmm.
the manager duties to you. And so in that way, you keep your name out of the Secretary of State records. If somebody can easily find out that you own 30 or 50 or 100 LLCs, they're going to know you're wealthy, and you're a target, right? So what are you doing to keep your name out of the public records? We also offer for, our clients in Wyoming and Colorado, we offer nominee services. Or if their Wyoming or Colorado entity is purchasing something in another state, we can still act there as well. So we'll act as the nominee manager because your name goes into the title records. And depending on the state, the indexing can be everything in that deed could potentially be indexed on title records, allowing someone to easily find you. And for those who are, all of us, I think these days have our views in politics or are outspoken online in one way or another. If someone knows where you live, you are really taking a risk there. And so how can you protect yourself from that type of risk where someone's, doxing you, or what are they, swatting you, or
I don't know.
showing up at your house with a gun,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we do offer those services. Nominee services and privacy has got to be a key element. A lot of people in tech understand it, at least people who work in sort of information security, call it attack surfaces. How do you minimize your attack surfaces
Mm-hmm.
for whether it's a potential creditor or someone wishing to do you or your family harm? How are you minimizing those?
Mm-hmm.
And we offer a lot of solutions in those areas.
Yeah, and see, ladies and gentlemen, you can't get this from normal websites that where you can just download the forms. We all know, those websites where you click download everything you want, and then how do you fill it out? What kind of protection? All you have to do is miss one line, and it I'm sure voids everything. So you know how important is it, Jonathan? While we wrap up, it's kind of like the same things. I'm not going to diagnose myself online. You know, with I'm sure a lot of people have tried to diagnose me, but you go to a doctor, right? I'm not going to go in and try to self-diagnose myself. There are, and I feel the same thing with attorneys. Entity, I have 4 or 5 different attorneys, and they each specialize in each different segments. And that is one thing. Don't download. It's like, look, I can save for $5. I can download my LLC 2-pager, and they're done. Please, people,
So
don't do that.
yeah, I view like an operating agreement as your foundational document.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's a single member LLC, well, do you need an agreement with yourself? Under most states, Colorado and Wyoming, you actually don't need an operating agreement. There's no requirement to have one for a single member LLC, but it can build in creditor protections. So if you got an LLC operating agreement that says a creditor can't do this or a creditor can't do that,
Mm-hmm.
that can be a powerful tool in front of a judge. When you start getting into partnerships with other individuals, it's not your spouse. Even if it is, maybe you still want an operating agreement there with your spouse who's in charge. Um, I, 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 I think you need to sort of take a step back every time you're putting capital at risk and say, is this the best way to do this? How am I limiting my risk in this endeavor? And then if you're not sure, there's that Donald Rumsfeld, the knowns, those are the things we know, the unknown, or the known unknowns, and then the unknown unknowns. And if you're in the unknown phase, I think you should speak to an attorney. You should speak to us, or you could speak to someone else and say, what am I missing here? One of the most common things I see is individuals are starting up a limited liability company will dump a whole load of cash into the LLC without realizing there's another way to do it. The other way to do it is to lend money to your LLC,
Mm-hmm.
right? Become a creditor to your LLC. Sure, you have to have a certain amount of capital in there for operating purposes, but anything above that sort of minimum operating capital, make it a loan.
Mhm.
If anyone comes in and gets a judgment against that LLC, you're going to be ahead of them in terms of creditor protections, and that's something we do very often. You know, you have to document. It needs to be bona fide. You can't just say this was a loan. It
Mhm.
needs to be documented. But that is a baseline issue. If you didn't know about that, the listeners, there's a dozen or 20 other things that we can offer advice on. So if you're not
Yeah.
sure what your risks are, you should definitely set up a time and talk with an attorney.
And while you're at it, you should talk to Jonathan instead of another one. So, Jonathan, how can our listeners find you if they are interested?
Yeah, go to Colorado LLC attorney or Wyoming LLC attorney,
Mhm.
and you can book time with myself and the other attorneys in the firm. You know, depending on what you need, we can you can read our bios and read what areas we focus on and pick the right attorney.
Mhm.
Very easy to do, and all you're obligated for is that half an hour that you book.
And I should say, you don't have to be from Colorado or Wyoming in order to talk to you.
No, if you're concerned about asset protection, there's sort of this idea of the multi-jurisdictional practice of law,
Mhm.
and for areas of particular expertise, you may not be able to get it in your state. You can reach out to attorneys in any state and say, I have this issue. I'm concerned about asset protection. You know, does it touch Colorado? You know, there's going to be certain things that an attorney from another state can't do in your state. But when it comes to getting generalized advice about asset protection, which a lot of it is sort of it's federal law applies. We've got bankruptcy law, we've got a state law, IRS related issues, taxes, and then most states have adopted these uniform laws, Uniform Limited Liability Company Act, Uniform Corporations Act, Uniform Trust Act, and so on. And so, you know, we can provide this broad guidance on asset protection, and it's often the case we say, look, you know, we can do this part,
Mhm.
but then you need to work with an attorney in your home state because there's property issues here which are going to be very specific to a particular state. So I'm happy to speak with anyone about the asset protection in
Mhm.
general and some of the techniques that are broadly applicable across the entire country.
Yeah, and like entity formations, LLCs, anyone can do that. Any attorney, any state. Um, well, Jonathan, I appreciate you being on today. You've taught me a few things, and I've been buying and having LLCs created for about 20 some years. So it's been wonderful, and I thank you for this time. I
Well, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
It was great talking to you, and I'm glad you gave me an audience with a group that I think could really use this. Really smart individuals who typically know what they know and know what they don't know as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank